Welcome to the Allison Knows podcast. Today we're diving into a really interesting mix of tech, global power plays, and maybe a little bit of karma. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely some poetic justice vibes in the sources you sent.
Exactly.
Oh.
We've got news articles, expert analysis, even a transcript from a YouTube psychic reading, and it all points to some pretty big changes happening right now.
It is kind of wild how one seemingly small event, like the launch of this new Chinese AI app called DeepSeek, has set off a chain reaction across so many different areas.
Right? It's like that butterfly effect
Yeah.
thing, one little flap of a wing in the tech world, and suddenly we've got tsunamis everywhere.
A very apt analogy. So DeepSeek, it's being compared to ChatGPT, but with a pretty significant twist.
The twist being its price tag, right?
Okay.
I mean, DeepSeek is reportedly something like 10 to 20 times cheaper than its U.S.-based counterparts.
Exactly. And that has sent some serious shockwaves through the tech market. I mean, imagine being one of those big tech companies who've been banking on AI being the next gold rush.
Ouch. Yeah, that's got to sting. So for what I'm seeing in the sources, this cost difference isn't just about DeepSeek undercutting the competition. They've actually made a technological leap forward.
That's right. The sources indicate that they're leveraging a more efficient algorithm that requires less processing power, which obviously translates to lower operating costs.
So they're not just playing the pricing game, they're outsmarting the competition on a technical level, too.
Yeah.
No wonder the NASDAQ took a hit, like a 2.7% drop.
That's what the sources are saying. That's a pretty significant dip. And you have to wonder what this means for those who went all in on the AI hype.
Yeah, like those who bet big on US AI dominance. Probably sweating a little bit right now.
Well, the sources specifically mention Elon Musk and Peter Thiel as individuals who might be feeling the pressure.
Right. They invested heavily in the whole AI narrative, didn't they?
They did, and now that narrative is being seriously challenged.
One analyst in the sources even used the term holding the bag, which I guess means they're stuck with assets that are suddenly worth a lot less than they thought.
Exactly. Holding the bag essentially means being left with overvalued or depreciated assets after a market downturn. Often it happens when others have managed to sell off their holdings before the bottom falls out.
So DeepSeek isn't just some random app. It's a symbol of a changing landscape. It's like China is sending a message. They're not just playing catch-up anymore.
That's a very astute observation. They're making a play for leadership in the tech world, and this has definitely raised concerns in Washington, especially given how much Trump has been pushing for U.S. investment in AI.
Right. He made a big deal about that Stargate initiative, remember? That multi-billion-dollar fund dedicated to AI development.
Yes, and the sources are suggesting that Stargate, which involves some pretty big names like Larry Ellison of Oracle and Sam Altman, might be in jeopardy now.
How so?
Well, think about it. Investors might be hesitant to pour money into a field where the U.S. is suddenly playing catch-up. They're seeing that China is making moves, and they might decide to shift their focus.
It's like the rug's been pulled out from under them. And speaking of unexpected developments, the sources also mention a rather intriguing incident in the Baltic Sea.
Yes. The ship that was detained by the Swedish Coast Guard for allegedly tampering with those undersea cables between Sweden and Estonia.
Sounds like something straight out of a spy movie. What's the connection to all of this AI and tech stuff we've been talking about?
Well, the sources suggest that this incident might be part of a larger pattern of activity potentially linked to Russia and their efforts to disrupt critical infrastructure.
So we're not talking about some random act of vandalism. This was a strategic move.
That's what the sources are indicating. Those cables carry a huge amount of data, including sensitive communications, financial transactions. Disrupting them could cause significant economic and political damage.
So it's a way to sow chaos and potentially weaken their adversaries.
Yeah.
And they're pointing the finger at Russia. That's a pretty bold claim.
They're not making any outright accusations, but they do highlight the fact that Russia has a history of this type of activity. They also mention that NATO is closely monitoring the situation.
Okay, so NATO is involved now. This just got a whole lot more interesting. What do you think their response is going to be?
The sources are a little vague on that, but they do emphasize that NATO is prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to protect its members' interests. They specifically mention Mark Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister, as a key figure in the situation.
Rutte. Why him? What makes him stand out in this context?
He's described as being very strategic and discreet, someone who carefully weighs his options before making a move. The sources suggest that he's very aware of NATO's plans and is playing a central role in coordinating their response.
So we've got Chinese AI shaking things up, potential Russian aggression in the Baltic Sea, and a Dutch prime minister orchestrating a response behind the scenes. This is getting intense. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can join the Allison Knows community on Spotify and YouTube to continue the conversation. What else do the sources say about how all these events might be connected?
Well, it seems like we're witnessing a kind of domino effect. One event triggers a chain reaction leading to a cascade of consequences that reshape the global landscape.
So DeepSeek wasn't just a tech disruption, it was the first domino to fall. And now we're seeing those ripple effects spread across the world, from financial markets to geopolitical tensions.
Exactly. And speaking of individuals who are caught up in this wave of change, maybe we should shift our attention to Elon Musk. The sources paint a rather intriguing picture of his current situation. It seems like there's this growing sense of, discontent with Musk's actions and his influence.
Yeah, definitely. There's been a noticeable shift in public opinion regarding Musk. What specifically are the sources pointing to?
Well, his recent alignment with certain political ideologies and his whole handling of X, formerly Twitter, those seem to be the main issues.
Right, it's a very public support for that far-right German political party definitely raised some eyebrows.
Yeah.
And then there's all the controversy surrounding how he's managing X.
Exactly. There's this feeling that he's wielding his power irresponsibly, maybe even dangerously. The sources really focus on these allegations made by a whistleblower called Concerned Bird.
That's the former X-employee who claims that Musk was basically using the platform to try to interfere in the 2024 U.S. presidential election. Right?
Precisely. The whistleblower alleges that Musk was using X to push pro-Trump content, create fake accounts using AI, and even allowing foreign governments to meddle in the election process.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty serious stuff.
Yeah.
Are those accusations being taken seriously by the authorities?
Absolutely. The sources suggest that various governments, particularly in Europe, are starting to view Musk as a legitimate threat to democracy and national security. Some even go so far as use the term terrorist to describe him.
Terrorist? Wow, that's a pretty loaded term. What are the implications of labeling him like that?
It signifies that they're viewing his actions as a direct threat to national security, to the stability of democratic institutions.
So it's not just about his business practices or his political views. It's about his potential to really disrupt the fabric of society.
Exactly. And the sources predict that European nations might actually take some pretty drastic measures.
Like what?
They're talking about possibly banning his businesses, restricting his travel, and maybe even issuing a warrant for his arrest.
That's a huge shift from how he used to be perceived, as this tech visionary and innovator. It seems like the walls are closing in on him.
It does. And it's a reminder that power without accountability can have some pretty severe consequences.
Okay, so we've got Elon Musk potentially facing international sanctions and arrest Chinese AI, disrupting the tech industry. NATO possibly gearing up for something. That's like we're living in a real-life thriller.
And in the middle of all this, we have this other storyline that the sources find kind of intriguing. Doug Emhoff, Kamala Harris's husband, has announced a new job at a global law firm.
Wait a minute. This feels like a complete left turn. What's the connection here?
Well, the sources suggest that this might be a strategic move, a way to position Emhoff for something bigger down the line.
So are they saying that he's being groomed for a political career of his own?
That's one interpretation.
Yeah.
Sources also hint that this new job might be temporary, just a way to keep him busy while Harris prepares to potentially step into the presidency.
Hold on, are they suggesting that Kamala Harris is about to become president? What's going on?
It's not explicitly stated, but the timing of Emhoff's career move, along with all the increasing pressure on President Trump, it does raise some eyebrows.
So let me get this straight. We've got a potential presidential transition in the U.S. The tech world is in turmoil. There's some shadowy geopolitical conflict brewing. And Elon Musk might be labeled an international terrorist. Did I miss anything?
I think you summarized it pretty well. It's a lot to process, isn't it?
It really is. It's like the world is on fast forward and everything's happening at once.
What do you think all of this means for the average person, just trying to make sense of it all?
I think the main takeaway here is that we're living in a time of unprecedented change and uncertainty. The old rules don't apply anymore, and the future is totally up in the air.
So it's not just about staying informed, it's about being adaptable and open to new possibilities.
Exactly. We need to be ready to challenge our assumptions, question the narratives we're being fed, and really think critically about the information we're consuming.
It's like we need to upgrade our operating systems to keep up with the pace of change.
I like that analogy. The sources emphasize the need to be aware of how interconnected everything is. Something that seems like an isolated event can have ripple effects that reach far and wide.
Like that butterfly effect we were talking about earlier. A small action can set off a chain reaction that changes the entire landscape.
And speaking of interconnectedness, let's go back to that ship seizure in the Baltic Sea. The sources make a point of saying that this wasn't an isolated incident. You're right, there have been multiple reports of similar incidents in that area.
Yeah.
Are they trying to tell us something?
It seems like it. And remember how we talked about NATO potentially preparing for something? Well, those ship incidents are being viewed in that context. It's like they're pieces of a larger puzzle.
Okay, so someone is deliberately damaging these undersea cables. But why? And how does that tie into what NATO is planning?
That's where things get a little murky. The sources don't say outright who's behind these cable incidents, but they strongly suggest a connection to Russia.
Russia. Interesting. So are they saying that NATO is gearing up for some kind of conflict with Russia?
Not necessarily a direct conflict, but definitely a strategic response. They seem to be gathering information, assessing the situation, and preparing for potential escalations.
Okay, but that sounds a little ominous. What kind of escalations are we talking about here?
They don't go into specifics, but they emphasize that NATO is still committed to their original plan, whatever that may be. It's just that the timing and execution might be more fluid now, especially with Trump back in the White House.
So let me make sure I've got this right. We've got a potential showdown brewing between NATO and Russia. Elon Musk is facing international backlash, and the tech world is still reeling from that Chinese AI bombshell. This is a lot to keep track of.
It is, but what's even more fascinating is the timing of it all. So like all these events are converging at the same time, creating this sense of urgency and anticipation.
Like some kind of cosmic alignment or something. You think it's just a coincidence that all this is happening at the same time?
I doubt it. The sources seem to think there's a reason behind it. It's as though the pieces are falling into place for a major shift in the global balance of power.
Okay, so what does this all mean for our listeners? How can they make sense of all this and maybe even get ready for what's coming next?
I think the most important thing is to be aware of how interconnected everything is. What happens in one part of the world can have ripple effects everywhere. It's also crucial to be adaptable and to really think critically about the information you're taking in.
That's great advice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can join the Allison Knows community on Spotify and YouTube to continue the conversation.
Okay, so we've covered the tech world, global politics, even a bit of international intrigue. But what about the human element in all of this? What's happening to the people who are caught in the middle of these events?
That's a really important point. The sources, especially that YouTube psychic reading, they seem to frame all of this as a kind of karmic reckoning.
Karma. So are they saying that people like Elon Musk are getting what they deserve?
I wouldn't necessarily put it like that. Karmic reckoning, as they use it, suggests that actions have consequences. Sometimes those consequences can feel like a form of cosmic justice or a balancing of the scales.
So they're saying that all of Elon's alleged manipulation of X, his embrace of those far-right ideologies, it's all coming back to bite him.
That seems to be the narrative they're putting forward. And it's not just about Elon. They also talk about other tech figures who profited from the AI bubble. You know, those whose actions might have led to where we are now, right? The tech bros, as some people call them. They're facing a reckoning of sorts. But what about the everyday people who might get caught in the crossfire? The ones who rely on these technologies who could be impacted by economic shifts or geopolitical conflicts?
That's a crucial question and one that we should all be thinking about. The sources don't directly address that point, but they do encourage us to consider the wider implications of these events and how they might affect our lives.
So it's not just about watching the drama unfold from a distance. It's about understanding how these global shifts might actually translate into personal experiences.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this interconnected web and that our actions, even small ones, can have ripple effects that go way beyond our immediate circle.
That's a powerful thought. It reminds us that we have a responsibility to be informed, to be engaged, and to actively participate in shaping the world we want to live in. Welcome back to the Allison Knows podcast. You guys have sent in some seriously thought-provoking stuff for this deep dive, and it's pretty clear that we're living through some major shifts in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, the way technological advancements, geopolitical maneuvering, and just individual actions are all coming together, it's creating this landscape that's both fascinating and kind of unsettling.
So true. Okay, so just to recap, we've talked about Chinese AI shaking up the tech scene, Elon Musk potentially facing some serious consequences, and even a possible power shift here in the U.S. with Kamala Harris waiting in the wings. What's the big takeaway for our listeners? What's the message we want them to walk away with?
I think the biggest theme that keeps coming up in the sources is this idea of interconnectedness. You know how what might seem like isolated incidents or personal choices are actually all part of this much bigger web of cause and effect?
Yeah, it's like that butterfly effect we keep talking about.
Yeah,
One little flap of a wing in one part of the world can create a massive storm on the other side.
exactly. And in this case, the butterfly could be anything from the launch of a new AI app to a controversial tweet, or even that seemingly minor incident in the Baltic Sea.
So it's not enough to just skim the headlines. We need to really dig in and try to understand how these events are connected and what the ripple effects might be.
Absolutely. The sources are really pushing us to think critically about the information we're taking in, to question narratives, and to always consider the broader context.
No more burying our heads in the sand, right?
Yeah.
We have to be active participants in understanding and shaping the world around us.
Exactly. And that starts with recognizing that we have agency. We're not just passive observers of these events. Our choices, our actions, and even our inaction, they all contribute to the unfolding narrative.
So what can our listeners do to make sense of all this and maybe even prepare for what's coming next?
First and foremost, stay informed. But don't just passively consume information. Analyze it. Look for connections, question assumptions, and try to see things from multiple perspectives.
So it's like we need to become expert puzzle solvers, piecing together all these fragments of information to see the bigger picture.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, there's no one right answer or interpretation. The future is fluid and uncertain. What matters is that we're engaged, informed, and prepared to adapt to whatever comes next.
Okay, so stay informed, think critically, and be adaptable. Any other words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap up this deep dive?
I think it's important to remember that we're not alone in this work. Connect with others, share information, and have those tough conversations. Collective wisdom and collaboration are crucial when it comes to navigating these complex times.
Like we're all in the same boat trying to navigate these uncharted waters. We need to work together if we want to find our way to a better future.
Exactly. And remember, even in the midst of all the chaos and uncertainty, there's always room for growth, innovation, and positive change.
That's a really empowering thought.
Yeah.
It's not about giving in to fear or paranoia. It's about embracing the challenges and using our collective knowledge and creativity to build a future that reflects our values.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and it's obvious that the world is at a crossroads.
From Chinese AI to shifting power dynamics to the potential consequences of individual actions, it's been quite a journey.
It really has. But I truly believe that by staying informed, thinking critically, and working together, we can navigate these turbulent times and create a future that's both exciting and hopeful.
That's what it's all about. Thanks to everyone for tuning into this deep dive into some really complex issues. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can join the Allison Knows community on Spotify and YouTube to continue the conversation.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay connected.
Thank you for listening to the Allison Knows podcast. Follow Allison on Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok.